Episode 1, The Golden Illusion. New York, October 24th, 1929. A man dressed in a three-piece suit stands on the edge of a ledge 70 meters above Wall Street. The icy October wind rustles his silk ties below. A crowd begins to gather. They don't shout. They don't beg. They simply watch, because on that day, he won't be the first, nor the last. Inside the New York Stock Exchange building, the roar is deafening. Thousands of voices shout contradictory orders. Paper rains down from the balconies like cursed confetti. Telephones ring incessantly, bringing news no one wants to hear. On the screens, numbers cascade, wiping out fortunes with every passing second. How did the richest country in the world fall into this abyss? What turned the American dream into the worst financial nightmare in modern history? To understand Black Thursday, we must go back a decade, when America was dancing to jazz and the champagne was flowing as if it would never run out. 1920. The Great War has ended, and the United States emerges as the great victor unscathed. While Europe counts its dead and rebuilds bombed-out cities, American factories are working at maximum capacity. Industrial production soars. Exports break records. The U.S. dollar becomes the world's currency. It's the age of jazz, fringe dresses, and the Charleston. Cities grow skyward with gravity-defying skyscrapers. Ford Model Ts flood the highways. Electricity transforms homes. Radio brings entertainment to millions. Everything is new, shiny, electric. But what truly defines this decade is something more intoxicating than the forbidden alcohol served in clandestine speakeasies. Stock market speculation. Wall Street has become the new Dorado, where anyone can get rich. Or so the newspapers, bankers, and politicians promise. In brokerage firms, secretaries, taxi drivers, housewives, and teachers line up to invest their savings. They don't need to understand what companies do. They just need to know that stocks always go up. Always. The secret to easy wealth has a name: margin buying. An investor can buy stocks by paying only 10% of their value. The broker lends the rest. If the stock rises, the profits increase tenfold. It's free money, millions of Americans believe. Jesse Livermore, Wall Street's most famous speculator, has perfected it. He has made and lost fortunes several times, but in 1929, he is at the top. He watches the market from his office in the financial district, where a dozen ticker tapes spit out constant information. Livermore doesn't follow the crowd. He watches, waits, and when he detects weakness, he attacks like a predator. Meanwhile, commercial banks have discovered that lending money to buy stocks is much more profitable than financing factories or farms. Credit flows without limits. Investment trusts are multiplying. Funds that sell stock to buy shares in other funds, creating financial pyramids dressed in respectability. Charles Mitchell, president of the National City Bank, has become the high priest of this religion. He sells stocks as if they were automobiles, with commission-based salesmen traveling the country promising annual returns of 20, 30, and 50%. His branches spread throughout the United States, democratizing speculation. Not everyone is hypnotized. In March 1929, economist Roger Babson warns at a conference that sooner or later there will be a catastrophic crash. The market trembles briefly, but recovers within days. Babson is ridiculed in the newspapers. Wall Street calls him a prophet of the apocalypse, a killjoy, a professional pessimist. Paul Warburg, one of the architects of the Federal Reserve System, publishes warnings about the speculative orgy. He is ignored. Alexander Noyes, financial editor of the New York Times, writes cautious columns pointing out that valuations have lost touch with reality. No one wants to hear bad news when they're getting rich. President Herbert Hoover, newly inaugurated in March 1929, expressed private concern about speculation, but publicly remained optimistic. After all, prosperity was his political platform. The United States had defeated poverty, he proclaimed. The capitalist system had been perfected. Even some within the financial establishment are beginning to grow restless. Central bankers are debating whether to raise interest rates to quell speculation, but they fear provoking exactly what they are trying to prevent: a correction. They are caught between fire and ice. Summer of 1929. The Dow Jones Industrial Average reaches stratospheric heights. The shares of Radio Corporation of America have increased fivefold in 2 years. General Electric, U.S. Steel, General Motors, all are skyrocketing. Newspapers publish stories of bootblacks and hairdressers who have become millionaires thanks to a providential tip. At country clubs, at Long Island parties, on yachts cruising Hudson, the conversation is always the same. What to buy, when to sell, who made the best deal. The stock market has become a national sport, a religion, an obsession. But beneath the golden surface, invisible cracks are spreading. Industrial production has begun to slow since June. Automobile sales are falling. The construction sector is cooling. Inventories are piling up in warehouses. Farmers, who never participated in the boom, are struggling with depressed prices and mounting debt. The real economy is separating from the financial market, but no one seems to notice or care. Stocks have their own logic, their own orbit. They have ceased to be certificates of ownership of real companies and have become casino chips, betting not on the value of businesses, but on what the next buyer will be willing to pay. September arrives with the first signs of nervousness. The market reaches its absolute peak on September 3rd, 381.17 on the Dow Jones. It is the moment of maximum euphoria and maximum vulnerability. Then something changes. The market begins to fall. It's not dramatic at first, just red days here and there. But the decline is persistent. The most astute investors, professionals like Jesse Livermore, begin to sell. Discreetly, without fanfare, they convert their shares into cash. Brokers are starting to do something that was previously rare: margin calls. When you buy stocks with only 10% of your own capital, and those shares fall, you need to put up more money to maintain your position. Phone calls pour into offices and homes. We need you to deposit $1,000 before the market closes, or we'll have to sell your positions. Many investors don't have that cash. They've invested everything they have and much they don't have. When they can't cover margin calls, their brokers automatically sell their stocks. These forced sales push prices down, which generates more margin calls, more forced sales. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. Weekend of October 19th to 20th, 1929, in their Connecticut mansions and Park Avenue apartments, the big bankers are restless. The previous week's declines have been worrying. On Monday, the market falls dramatically. On Wednesday, the decline accelerates. Charles Mitchell cancels a trip to Europe and returns urgently to New York. J.P. Morgan partners gather in their stone fortress at 23 Wall Street. Telephones ring with calls from London, Paris, and Berlin. European markets are reeling in sympathy. Sunday newspapers try to maintain calm. They publish statements from prominent economists assuring them that the economy's fundamentals are sound. Some even argue that the correction is healthy, that it will eliminate speculative excess and allow for healthier growth. But at brokerage firms that open briefly on Saturday to process pending transactions, employees work until dawn, overwhelmed by the volume. The tabulating machines can't keep up. The phones don't stop ringing. On Sunday, churches are more crowded than usual. Pastors preach about the vanity of earthly riches, but many of their parishioners are mentally calculating how much they have lost and how much more they can bear to lose. Thursday, October 24th, 1929. The sky over Manhattan dawns leaden gray. A cold breeze blows in from the Hudson River, carrying with it the smell of salt and metal. The streets of the financial district begin a fill-up earlier than usual. Brokerage firm employees have arrived hours before dawn, preparing for what they all know will be a brutal day. The phones are already ringing. Sell orders flood in from all over the country. California, Texas, Illinois, Florida. Everyone wants to leave at the same time. When the opening bell rings at 10 a.m., panic sets in. The volume of sell orders is so massive that the system crashes. The phones are jammed. The ticker machines that transmit prices are immediately delayed, first by minutes, then half an hour, then longer. This technological delay amplifies the terror. Investors across the country are operating in the dark, unaware of how much they've actually lost, making decisions based on outdated information. Uncertainty fuels panic. Panic breeds more selling. On the stock exchange floor, chaos reigns. Traders shout orders until they're hoarse. Some weep openly. Others freeze in shock. Stocks plummet, losing 5, 10, 20 points in minutes. Episode 2. The Saviors of Wall Street. Black Thursday at noon. As panic engulfs the stock exchange floor, a secret meeting is convened in the most powerful building on Wall Street, J.P. Morgan's headquarters at number 23. The men who discreetly arrive through the side entrance are the titans who control the American financial system. Thomas Lamont, Morgan's senior partner after the death of J.P. Morgan Jr., Charles Mitchell of National City Bank, Albert Wiggin of Chase National Bank, William Potter Guaranty Trust, and Seward Prosser Bankers Trust. Together, they control more capital than many countries. The office where they meet features dark with paneling and portraits of 19th century financiers. Wars have been decided here. Presidents elected. Industrial empires saved or destroyed. Today, these men must decide whether to save the stock market or let capitalism burn itself out. Lamont, with his impeccably trimmed mustache and suit tailored in London, takes the floor. The market has lost all contact with reason, he explains in a calm voice. The forced liquidation is creating a death spiral. If they don't intervene now, the contagion will spread to banks, then to the entire economy. The solution they propose is bold and simple. Show confidence. These banks will create a pool, a common fund of $250 million. They will use that money to strategically buy shares, supporting the prices of the most important companies. They won't try to stop the fall completely. That would be impossible. But they can slow it, stabilize it, and demonstrate that the fundamentals remain solid. This is exactly what J.P. Morgan Sr. did during the Panic of 1907, when he gathered bankers in this very office and saved the financial system with his reputation and his money. That intervention made him a legend. Now, his spiritual heir will attempt to repeat the miracle. But there's a problem that no one openly mentions. These same banks have been the main drivers of speculation. They've lent billions to buy stocks. They've created and sold the investment trusts that are now collapsing. Saving the market also means saving themselves. The decision is made in less than 30 minutes. The pool will be formed. Richard Whitney, vice president of the stock exchange and brother of a Morgan partner, will be its visible agent. At 1:30 p.m., he will enter the exchange floor and begin buying. 1:30 p.m., Richard Whitney strides toward the stock exchange floor with the confidence of a general entering battle. Tall, aristocratic, his boutonniere intact despite the chaos, he heads straight for the U.S. Steel stand, the market's most iconic stock. His voice cuts through the din like a knife. I'm buying 10,000 shares of steel at $205. The price is significantly higher than recent trading. A murmur ripples through the floor. Morgan is buying. The big boys are moving in. Panic freezes. Whitney proceeds methodically to other positions, buying large blocks of the most important stocks. General Electric, AT&T, General Motors. He doesn't rush. Each purchase is a statement, a declaration that the value is still there, that only the weak are selling. The effect is electrifying. Prices stabilize, then begin to recover. By 3 p.m., the market has pared most of the day's losses. When the closing bell rings, the index is virtually unchanged. Nearly 13 million shares have been traded, an all-time record, but catastrophe has been averted. That night, newspapers print special editions proclaiming victory over panic. Bankers save the market. The headlines read. Thomas Lamont holds a press conference where, with his characteristic composure, he describes the day as a minor sales glitch. Nothing fundamental has changed in the American economy, he asserts. The future remains bright. Wall Street exhales with relief. In the clubs and restaurants of the financial district, bankers and brokers toast their salvation. The system worked. The great sages of money intervened and restored order. The capitalist machine has proven stronger than irrational panic. But in the offices of brokerage firms, an army of employees works through the night, processing the unprecedented volume. The ticker machines, which transmit prices hours late, finally catch up at 7 p.m., more than 4 hours after close. Thousands of investors have traded all day without really knowing what was going on. And in middle-class households across the country, millions of people are counting their losses. Many have received margin calls they can't cover. Their stocks have been liquidated at panic prices. They don't have the option of waiting for a recovery. For them, the losses are final, permanent. Friday, October 25th. The market opens nervously but steadily. The major banks continue to buy strategically. Prices fluctuate, but do not collapse. At the end of the day, the index closes slightly higher. Saturday's newspapers are triumphalist. The storm has passed. Wall Street recovers. Confidence returns. President Hoover issues a statement from the White House. The fundamental businesses of the country, the production and distribution of goods, are on a sound and prosperous basis. Industrial leaders echo the sentiment. Henry Ford announces he will not cut wages, and John D. Rockefeller declares he is buying stock. But beneath this orchestrated display of confidence, the reality is darker. Banks have spent a significant portion of their capital intervening. They cannot sustain the market indefinitely. What's worse, Thursday's intervention has created a false sense of security. Many investors who are considering exiting the market now believe the worst is over. Banks won't allow another drop. They reason it's safe to hold positions, perhaps even buy more while prices are low. It's exactly the mistaken belief that will make Thursday's disaster much worse. Monday, October 28th, 1929. The market opens without any drama and without any visible intervention from the banking pool. During the first hour, everything seems relatively normal, but gradually, selling pressure begins to increase. What few understand is that Thursday's damage has had time to spread over the weekend. Thousands of investors have received margin calls that must be met on Monday. Many don't have the cash. Their brokers begin liquidating positions automatically. By midday, the market was falling rapidly. By mid-afternoon, the situation was worse than on Thursday. More than 9 million shares were traded. The banking pool tried to intervene again, but this time the effect was minimal. There was too much foreselling, too much pent-up fear. By the close of trading, the Dow Jones had fallen 13%. It was the worst one-day drop in the history of the stock market. But no one yet knew that this was just a prelude. The real apocalypse would arrive tomorrow. On the night of Monday, October 28th, New York City doesn't sleep. In Wall Street offices, the lights stay on until dawn. Employees process a volume of transactions that has overwhelmed all systems. The phones ring constantly with desperate clients trying to understand what has happened to their money. In investors' apartments and homes, scenes of despair unfold. Men who considered themselves rich a week ago calculate they've lost their entire life savings. Family arguments turn bitter. Why did you invest so much? Why did you buy on margin? How are we going to pay the mortgage? The children's education? Some make fatal decisions. A middle-aged broker in Brooklyn writes a note to his family. I can't face ruin. He closes the kitchen windows, turns on the gas, and sits and waits. They find him in the morning. The newspapers won't report his death. There are too many similar ones to make the news. In the bankers' mansions, the atmosphere is tense but not hopeless. They've lost money, certainly, but they're protected by corporate structures, trusts, and diversified investments. For them, this is a financial disaster. For millions of ordinary Americans, it's the end of the world. Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Since before dawn, crowds have gathered outside the stock exchange building. The police have to set up barricades. The atmosphere is one of contained hysteria, as if the entire city were on the verge of a nervous breakdown. When the opening bell rings, all hell breaks loose. There's no way to adequately describe the panic that consumes the market that day. Sell orders come in numbers that make Black Thursday seem peaceful. Prices don't fall, they plummet. Shares worth $50 in the morning are worth $20 at noon, $10 in the afternoon. The traders on the floor are physically exhausted, some collapsing from stress. The ticker machines are immediately delayed by 2 hours, then 3, then 4. Investors are trading completely blind, panic selling without knowing what prices they're selling at. The banking pool isn't intervening. It doesn't make sense. There isn't enough money in all the New York banks to stop this avalanche. The titans who saved the market on Thursday can now only watch. protect their own positions as best they can, and hope the system doesn't completely disintegrate. More than 16 million shares changed hands that day, another record that would not be surpassed for decades. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell another 12%. In 2 days, the market had lost a quarter of its value. Total losses since the September peak exceeded $30 billion, more than the entire cost of American participation in World War I. When the closing bell finally rings, an eerie silence falls over the stock exchange floor. Men in wrinkled, sweat-stained suits stare at each other speechlessly. They have just witnessed something unprecedented in the history of modern capitalism. The collapse of the value system that underpinned their entire civilization. Episode 3, The Contagion. The days following Black Tuesday are strangely calm on Wall Street. The market fluctuates without a clear direction, like a boxer reeling after a devastating blow. Trading volume drops dramatically. Surviving investors are paralyzed, unable to decide whether to sell what they've left or cling to the hope of recovery. At brokerage offices, the cleanup work continues. Thousands of accounts have been completely liquidated. Clients who bought stocks on margin have lost everything and also owe money to their brokers. Phone calls to collect these debts begin, initiating a legal process that will ruin thousands of families. Newspapers struggle to find explanations. Some blame professional speculators, short sellers who bet against the market. Others speak of conspiracy, of foreign manipulation. Few are willing to acknowledge the simple truth. The market was valued far above any economic reality, and a correction was inevitable. President Hoover convenes a series of meetings with industrial and banking leaders. The message that emerges is consistent. This is a market correction, not an economic crisis. The fundamentals remain solid. Production will continue. Employment will be sustained. With confidence and patience, recovery will soon arrive. November 1929. While bankers and politicians preach optimism, the first cracks appear in the real economy. Companies planning expansions cancel them. Construction projects come to a standstill as financing evaporates. Factories begin to reduce shifts and lay off workers. The problem is simple but devastating. Paper wealth has vanished, but paper debts are very real. People who borrowed to buy stocks now owe those loans without anything to show for it. To pay, they cut spending drastically. They stop buying cars, appliances, and new clothes. This reduction in consumption immediately hits the companies that produce these goods. Sales fall. Inventories accumulate. To adjust, companies reduce production and lay off employees. These laid-off workers further reduce their consumption, creating a self-reinforcing vicious cycle. Banks, which lent huge sums for stock speculation, now face massive losses. Many of those loans will never be repaid. To protect their capital, banks drastically restrict new lending, even to solid businesses. This credit crunch accelerates the downward spiral. December 1929. Christmas arrives in a transformed United States. New York's department stores, usually packed with shoppers, are eerily empty. The windows sparkle with decorations, but few people come in to buy. Salespeople wait with forced smiles that no one wants to see. In the industrial cities of the Midwest, factories are scaling back operations. Detroit, the heart of the auto industry, is seeing its production lines operating at half capacity. Pittsburgh steel mills are laying off thousands of workers. Coal mines are closing entire sectors. On farms, which never participated in the boom of the 1920s, the situation is becoming desperate. Agricultural prices continue to fall. Farmers who borrowed to buy land or equipment during the good times are now unable to pay their mortgages. Rural banks are beginning to foreclose, seizing family farms. Official optimism continues. In his New Year's message, President Hoover declares that 1930 will be a year of recovery and progress. Academic economists produce studies demonstrating that economic fundamentals remain sound. But on the streets, in the factories, on the farms, the reality is very different. Spring of 1930. The stock market has staged a modest recovery from its November lows. Optimists point to this as evidence that the worst is over. Wall Street wants to believe the ghost of October has been exorcised. But the real economy continues to deteriorate. The unemployment rate, which was 3% before the crash, now exceeds 8% and continues to rise. 4 million Americans are jobless. Lines at employment offices stretch for blocks. Businesses are failing at an alarming rate, not just small businesses, but also established corporations with decades of history. When a large company fails, it drags down dozens of suppliers and distributors with it. The contagion spreads in concentric waves. Banks are under increasing pressure. Depositors, nervous about the security of their savings, are beginning to withdraw money. Smaller banks, especially in rural areas, are unable to withstand these runs. 500 banks fail in the first 6 months of 1930. When a bank fails, its depositors' savings disappear. There is no deposit insurance. People lose decades of work in a single day. In his Manhattan office, Jesse Livermore counts his winnings. While millions were losing everything in October and November, he bet against the market and made approximately $100 million, an inconceivable fortune. He is the most hated man on Wall Street and the most envied. But Livermore isn't celebrating. He's lived through enough cycles to know this is just beginning. He's seen panics before. 1907, 1914. He knows that after the crash comes depression, and that depression is far worse than panic. Panic is acute, brief terror. Depression is chronic, prolonged misery. Look at the economic numbers that few are paying attention to. Industrial production falling month after month. International trade collapsing. Consumer prices falling, which sounds good but is a sign of destructive deflation. Debts remain the same while incomes fall, making them impossible to pay. Livermore quietly begins liquidating his positions, converting stocks and bonds into cash and gold. He knows what most people still don't accept. The United States is not in a market correction. It is entering the worst economic crisis in its history, and no one, not even the big banks or the government, knows how to stop it. Summer of 1930. The stifling heat settles over American cities, but even more stifling is the desperation growing in every corner of the country. Unemployment now exceeds 12%. More than 7 million people are looking for work that doesn't exist. On Manhattan street corners, men in shabby suits sell apples for 5 cents. They are former executives, former managers, former professionals who have lost everything and now try to maintain a vestige of dignity by earning any penny. Lines for free soup are becoming part of the urban landscape. Hoovervilles are beginning to appear, makeshift settlements made of cardboard and corrugated metal where the displaced live. The name is a bitter insult to the president who promised prosperity. In Central Park, in parks across Chicago and Los Angeles, these shanty towns are growing like mushrooms. Families disintegrate under the pressure. Men unable to find work or provide for their families leave, wandering in search of employment that doesn't exist. Children drop out of school to look for any kind of work. Women take jobs for wages that barely cover food. The American social structure begins to crumble. Autumn of 1930. 1 year after the crash, the stock market has lost almost half of its peak value. But this is almost irrelevant now. People aren't thinking about stocks. They're thinking about food, shelter, and surviving the next day. Banks continue to fail at an alarming rate. 1,000 banks have closed in 1930. Each failure wipes out the savings of thousands of families and removes more money from the economy. The monetary contraction is severe. There is literally less money circulating, which makes everything more difficult. International trade has collapsed. Countries are raising trade barriers to protect their domestic industries, but this only worsens the global situation. U.S. exports are falling dramatically. Factories that depended on foreign markets are closing permanently. In Washington, the Hoover administration finally recognized that this was more than a temporary fix. But the government's response was limited, conditioned by the dominant ideology that the government should not interfere with the market. Hoover believed in voluntarism, urging businesses to maintain wages and employment, but without mandates or massive public spending programs. Winter of 1930 to 31. The cold is especially brutal that year, as if nature itself were mocking human misery. In Hooverville, people burn whatever they can to keep warm. Hospitals report increasing cases of malnutrition, especially in children. The statistics are devastating, but they don't capture individual suffering. 15 million unemployed is a number, The face of a 40-year-old man who has applied unsuccessfully for 200 jobs, whose wife looks at him a mixture of compassion and reproach, whose children ask why there's no dinner. That's reality. In Wall Street offices, many are empty. Brokerage firms are consolidated or disappeared. The survivors operate with minimal staff, processing pathetically low trading volumes. The big casino is closed. No one has money to gamble, and no one trusts gambling anyway. Richard Whitney, the hero of Black Thursday who saved the market with his dramatic purchases, is still vice president of the stock exchange. But his firm is bleeding money. He has made disastrous investments, borrowed extensively, and is on the brink of collapse. No one knows yet, but in a few years, Whitney will go to prison for embezzlement. The symbol of Wall Street respectability will turn out to be a thief. Thomas Lamont and the other bankers who formed the rescue pool now face congressional investigations. What do they really know? When did they realize the market was unsustainable? Did they sell their own shares while advising the public to buy? The questions are uncomfortable. The answers, when they finally arrive, will destroy what remains of confidence in the financial system. And across America, one question haunts millions. How did this happen? How did the richest country in the world go from unlimited prosperity to massive misery in just 1 year? Who is responsible? And can it happen again? Episode 4. The World is Sinking. 1931. What began as a U.S. stock market crash has morphed into a global economic depression. The United States isn't collapsing alone. It's dragging the entire world down with it. The mechanism is brutal. In its simplicity, the United States was the world's largest lender. American banks have financed European reconstruction after the Great War. Now, desperate for liquidity, these banks are demanding immediate repayment of those loans. European countries cannot pay. Germany is hit especially hard. Its economy, barely recovered from the hyperinflation of 1923, depended on American investment. When that investment evaporated, Germany fell into a severe recession. Unemployment exploded. 6 million Germans were jobless by the end of 1932. England abandoned the gold standard in September 1931, a decision unthinkable years ago. The pound sterling, a symbol of financial stability for a century, now floated freely, depreciating. Dozens of countries followed suit. The international monetary system, which had brought order to global trade, disintegrated. The paradox of the Great Depression is obscene. There's both abundance and scarcity at the same time. The granaries are filled with grain that no one can buy. Warehouses accumulate clothing, shoes, and manufactured goods without buyers. The productive capacity exists. The products exist. The needs exist. What doesn't exist is money in the hands of those who need to buy. In the American Midwest, farmers face an impossible choice. Prices for wheat, corn, and cotton have fallen so dramatically that they no longer cover the cost of harvesting and transporting. Some farmers burn their crops because it's cheaper than transporting them to market. They burn food while people in the cities starve. Ranchers slaughter cattle and let them rot because they can't sell the meat at any price worth the effort. Milk is poured into ditches. Fruit is left to rot on the trees. Not out of cruelty, but because of ruthless mathematics, there's no money to buy. So there's no point in harvesting. Meanwhile, in the cities, soup kitchens serve watery soup to endless lines. Children go to school with empty stomachs. Teachers share their lunch with students who obviously haven't eaten in days. Malnutrition is becoming epidemic, especially among the most vulnerable. As if the economic depression weren't enough punishment, nature decided to add its own plague. 1931 marked the beginning of the worst drought in the recorded history of the Great Plains. For years, farmers had overcultivated the land, removing the native vegetation that held the soil in place. When the rain stops falling, the ground dries and pulverizes. Prairie winds whip up massive clouds of dust. Dust storms, called black blizzards, obscure the sun for days. Dust penetrates everything: homes, lungs, equipment. People develop dust pneumonia, a fatal condition. Farms become uninhabitable. Families pack what little they own into dilapidated pickup trucks and cars and flee west, seeking work in California. They are the Okies, environmental refugees in their own country. despised wherever they go, competing for scarce harvesting jobs that pay pennies. This mass migration adds another layer of misery to the Depression. Makeshift labor camps spring up in California, where thousands live in conditions that barely qualify as humane. Diseases spread. Families disintegrate. Children die of hunger and preventable disease. 1933. The banking crisis that began as a trickle in 1930 has become a flood. More than 5,000 banks have failed since the crash. The life savings of millions of Americans have simply disappeared, without compensation, without recourse. But the worst was yet to come. In February 1933, the bank panic reached its peak. Rumors of imminent bankruptcies caused runs on banks across the country. Desperate depositors lined up to withdraw their money before it was too late. The banks, which lend most of the money deposited, could not meet all the simultaneous withdrawals. State governors began declaring bank holidays, closing all banks in their states to prevent total collapse. By March, nearly all states have closed their banks. The U.S. banking system is effectively paralyzed. When Franklin Roosevelt took office as president on March 4, 1933, his first action was to declare a national bank holiday. All banks in the United States closed. For the first time in American history, the financial system was completely frozen. There was no way to deposit or withdraw money. There was no way to conduct normal transactions. The modern economy had ground to a halt. As capitalism self-destructs, extreme ideologies fill the void. In Germany, a former Austrian corporal with a distinctive mustache has taken advantage of the desperation. Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist Party promised jobs, national pride, and convenient enemies to blame. In the 1930 elections, the Nazis won 107 seats in the Reichstag, becoming the second largest party. In July 1932, they won 230 seats. On January 29, 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. German democracy was dead. In Italy, Benito Mussolini has already consolidated his fascist dictatorship. In Spain, political tensions are boiling over into civil war. In Japan, ultranationalist military forces are gaining power, greedily eyeing China. The Depression is not only destroying economies, it is destroying the international political order. Even in the United States, extreme voices are gaining an audience. Huey Long in Louisiana proposes radical wealth redistribution. Father Coughlin broadcasts anti-Semitic sermons on the radio to millions. American communists organize protests and strikes. American democracy seems fragile, vulnerable to mass despair. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to power promising a new deal for the American people. His energy contrasted dramatically with Hoover's stagnation. In his first 100 days, he pushed through more legislation than any president in history. Banking reform comes first. Banks were reopened only after being inspected and declared solvent. Federal deposit insurance is created, guaranteeing that savers will never again lose everything if their bank fails. It's revolutionary, and it works. Confidence is beginning to return. Then come mass employment programs. The Civilian Conservation Corps puts unemployed young people to work on conservation projects. The Works Progress Administration hires millions to build schools, roads, and parks. The Tennessee Valley Authority brings electricity to forgotten rural regions. The New Deal programs didn't end the Depression, but they provided crucial relief. They put millions to work. They put money into circulation. They restored a sense that the government cared, that the system could be reformed without revolution. Roosevelt saved American capitalism by radically changing it. The recovery is painfully slow. Unemployment, which reached 25% in 1933, gradually fell but remained stubbornly high. In 1937, a recession within the Depression pushed the numbers back up. The U.S. economy would not fully recover its 1929 level until well into the 1940s. The psychological trauma lasts even longer. An entire generation is marked by the experience. Those who lived through the Depression never forget. They hoard food, save obsessively, and distrust banks and markets. Financial security becomes an obsession. Frivolous spending seems sinful. Wall Street is tamed. The Securities and Exchange Commission is created to regulate the markets. The practices that cause the crash are banned. Margin trading is strictly limited. Commercial banks are separated from investment banks. The wild casino of the 1920s won't be returning anytime soon. But the cost has already been paid. Millions of lives ruined, families destroyed, dreams crushed, and worst of all, the crash and the depression have destabilized the world order, creating conditions for something even more terrible. 1939. Europe is once again at war. Hitler, whose rise was made possible by economic chaos, has invaded Poland. England and France declare war on Germany. World War II has begun. The connection to the 1929 crash is not direct, but it is undeniable. The Depression created mass despair. Despair caused entire societies to seek radical solutions. Fascism promised order, jobs, national glory. Millions, hungry and hopeless, accepted the offer. In the United States, the war will bring what the New Deal could not: full employment. Factories will operate around the clock, producing weapons. Unemployment will disappear. The economy will finally escape the depths of the Depression. But the price will be 50 million lives in the most destructive war in human history. Jesse Livermore, the speculator who made $100 million in crash, committed suicide in 1940. Despite his fortune, he lost everything again in bad investments. In a suicide note, he writes, "My life has been a failure. The man who dominated Wall Street could not conquer his own demons." Richard Whitney, the hero of Black Thursday, is in prison for robbery. Charles Mitchell, the priest of the bull market, was tried for tax evasion. Albert Wiggin of Chase Bank turns out to have shorted his own bank stock during the crash, betting against the institution he led. The titans of Wall Street have fallen, but the lessons of 1929 remain, etched into a nation's collective memory. For now, Episode 5, Forgotten Lessons, 1950. 21 years after the crash, the United States is a transformed country. The war is over. Victory has been complete. The economy is thriving like never before. Factories that produce tanks now produce automobiles. Those that built bombers now manufacture commercial airplanes. It's the beginning of the suburban dream. Houses with lawns, two-car garages, televisions in every room. The fear and misery of the 1930s seem like they belong to another century. A new generation is growing up that doesn't remember the Depression, that only knows abundance and optimism. Wall Street has also been transformed. The New Deal reforms have created a more stable, more regulated market. Speculative excesses are controlled. Banks are conservative, almost boring. No one talks about getting rich quick in the stock market. Stocks are serious, long-term investments. The crash veterans are aging, retiring, and dying. Their warnings about speculation and euphoria sound antiquated to young ears. This is a new era, say the young traders. We have regulation. We have oversight. We have computers. The mistakes of 29 cannot be repeated. 1960. The longest bull market in history is underway. Stocks rise year after year. A new generation of investors, with no memory of the crash, embraces the market with enthusiasm that worries the older generation. The Nifty 50 dominate. 50 growth stocks that supposedly can't fail. IBM, Xerox, Polaroid. They are the tech stocks of their era, the stocks of the future. Investors pay absurd multiples for them, convinced that growth justifies any price. Mutual funds are proliferating, democratizing investment just as trust did in the 1920s. Millions of Americans invest their savings, trusting professional managers to select stocks. Managers compete for returns, taking ever-increasing risks. But there are crucial differences from the 1920s. Deposit insurance protects savers. The SEC oversees the markets. Margin buying is limited. Firewalls work. When the market finally corrects in 1970, it's painful but not catastrophic. There's no bank run. There's no depression. The system holds up. 1980. A new economic philosophy dominates Washington. Ronald Reagan preaches that government is the problem, not the solution. Regulations are chains that stifle the dynamism of the free market. Wall Street needs to be freed to create wealth. Deregulation begins gradually, then accelerates. Restrictions on banking are relaxed. Commercial banks can once again engage in speculative activities. The separation between commercial and investment banking, a cornerstone of post-depression reforms, begins to erode. Financial instruments are becoming more complex, more opaque. Derivatives, swaps, securitizations, products that few understand but everyone sells. Financial innovation is praised as progress. Cautious voices are dismissed as dinosaurs who don't understand the new paradigm. Michael Milken revolutionized the junk bond market, democratizing access to capital for risky companies. He was celebrated as a financial genius until he was arrested for fraud. But the attitude he represented, the belief that rules are obstacles to be avoided, has taken deep root on Wall Street. October 19, 1987, 58 years after the crash of 1929, Wall Street is experiencing its worst day in history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average falls 22% in a single session. The percentage losses surpass even Black Tuesday. The causes are complex. Computerized trading programs that amplify the decline, concerns about trade deficits, global tensions. But the mechanism is familiar. Panic selling fuels more selling, a self-reinforcing downward spiral. The difference lies in the response. The Federal Reserve, under Alan Greenspan, intervenes immediately, flooding the system with liquidity. Banks continue lending. There are no bank runs. There is no collapse of the financial system. By the end of the week, the market stabilized. 2 years later, the losses have been fully recovered. It's a triumph of the lessons learned in 1929. The modern financial system can absorb shocks that would have destroyed the system of 1929. Regulators know what to do. Institutions are more robust. History will not repeat itself. Or so they think. 1999. A new mania takes hold on Wall Street. The internet promises to revolutionize everything. Companies with names ending in .com and no profits, no significant revenue, and sometimes no real products reach valuations in the billions. The parallels with 1929 are unsettling. Anyone can get rich. Preach the new economy evangelists. The old rules don't apply. Traditional valuation is obsolete. It's a new era. Everything is different this time. Investors mortgage homes to buy tech stocks. Employees leave stable jobs to join startups paid in stock options worth millions on paper. Day traders give up their careers to speculate full-time from home. The frenzy is complete. Alan Greenspan warns in a speech about irrational exuberance in the markets. The market falls briefly, then ignores the warning and continues rising. No one wants to hear bad news during a party. The music is loud, the drinks are flowing, and everyone is getting rich. March 2000. The dot-com bubble bursts. Technology stocks collapse, losing 70, 80, 90% of their value. Entire companies disappear. Paper fortunes evaporate. Thousands of employees discover their stock options are worthless. But again, there is no systemic contagion. The banks survive. The economy enters a mild recession, not a depression. The financial system, regulated and supervised, withstands a shock. The lessons of 1929 appear to have been learned. Speculation can create bubbles, but bubbles can burst without destroying the entire economy. However, something more insidious is happening. Every time the markets falter, the Federal Reserve intervenes, cutting interest rates, injecting liquidity, and bailing out the system. This policy creates what's called moral hazard, the belief that risks are limited because there's always a safety net. Speculators are learning a dangerous lesson. You can take extreme risks because if something goes wrong, the government will intervene. The profits are private, but the losses will be socialized. It's a perverse incentive that will generate the next crisis. 2003 to 2006. A new bubble is inflating, this time in the real estate sector. House prices are rising relentlessly. Everyone wants to buy before they rise further. Banks lend anyone without verifying income or employment. Subprime loans are proliferating. But this seems different from stock speculation. Homes are real, tangible assets. The real estate sector has never collapsed nationally in the United States. It's a safe investment, experts say. Moreover, modern financial sophistication has dispersed risk through securitization. No single institution can go bankrupt over mortgage lending. Wall Street packages these risky loans into complex financial instruments called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. Rating agencies, supposedly guardians of quality, give them top ratings. Pensions, universities, and foreign governments buy these products, trusting the ratings. It's a house of cards built on the assumption that real estate prices will always rise. When that assumption proves false, everything will collapse. But in 2006, few imagined that could happen. The Great Moderation seems to have tamed the business cycle. Recessions are short and mild. Expansions are long and strong. The era of financial crises is over. Summer of 2008. Cracks are appearing in the financial system. Bear Stearns, a historic investment bank, collapses and is sold off in an emergency in March. Real estate prices are falling. Foreclosures are multiplying. CDOs and other complex instruments are proving toxic. But Wall Street insists it's contained. Some banks are struggling, but the system is sound. The real economy is doing well. There's no systemic risk. Regulators echo these reassurances. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson publicly asserts that the financial system is resilient. Privately, Paulson is terrified. He can see what the public can't yet. The global financial system is on the brink of collapse. Banks are interconnected in ways no one fully understands. Contagion could be instantaneous and total, but he can't say it publicly without provoking exactly the panic he fears. September 2008 is just weeks away. Lehman Brothers, another Wall Street giant, is teetering. Its bankruptcy will unleash a crisis reminiscent of 1929, testing whether the lessons were truly learned or simply forgotten by a generation that never knew a real financial panic. History is about to rhyme, if not repeat itself exactly. Episode 6, 2008, The Return of Chaos. September 12, 2008. New York, Friday night. At the offices of the Federal Reserve Bank on Liberty Street, a few blocks from Wall Street, the most powerful men in American finance are meeting. The atmosphere is one to contain crisis, disciplined terror. Lehman Brothers, 158 years old, is on the verge of bankruptcy. Its assets are contaminated with toxic mortgages. Its counterparties are fleeing. On Monday, if a solution isn't found, Lehman will collapse. And no one knows what will happen next. Henry Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury and former CEO of Goldman Sachs, is leading the negotiations. At his side is Timothy Geithner, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, is on the phone from Washington. Bernanke is a scholar of the Great Depression. He dedicated his entire academic career to understanding what went wrong in 1929. Now he faces the possibility of living his own version. The CEOs of the big banks are there. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, John Thain of Merrill Lynch, Vikram Pandit of Citigroup. Each protects their institution's interests while Paulson demands they find a collective solution. The government won't bail out Lehman, Paulson insists. There won't be any public money. The industry must save itself. It's a risky bet. Paulson believes that allowing Lehman to fail will send a message. There are no implicit guarantees. Banks must manage their own risks. Moral hazard must end. But this doctrine is about to collide with the interconnected reality of the modern financial system. September 15, 2008. Lehman Brothers declares bankruptcy, the largest in American history. $619 billion in assets evaporate. 25,000 employees lose their jobs. The shock reverberates instantly throughout the global financial system. What Paulson didn't anticipate was contagion. Lehman wasn't just a bank. It was a counterparty in thousands of derivatives transactions. It was the invisible glue that kept entire markets running. When Lehman falls, no one knows who else is exposed, who will be next. AIG, the world's largest insurer, is collapsing. It sold mortgage default insurance, betting it would never kick in. Now it's kicking in en masse. AIG owes $70 billion it doesn't have. If AIG goes bust, It will drag down all the banks that bought its insurance. The commercial paper market, where companies obtain short-term financing, freezes. Businesses can't make payroll. They can't buy inventory. The real economy is hours away from shutting down. ATMs were on the verge of running out of cash. The global payment system was on the verge of collapse. Bernanke and Paulson realized with horror they made a catastrophic mistake. Lehman couldn't possibly fail. It was too interconnected. And now they must reverse their position in real time, bailing out AIG with $85 billion of public money just hours after letting Lehman fail penniless. The following days are pure chaos. The stock market plummets. Banks stop lending to each other, even overnight, because no one trusts the other will be alive tomorrow. Credit, the lifeblood of modern capitalism, stops flowing. Washington Mutual, the nation's largest savings bank, is failing. Wachovia is on the brink. Merrill Lynch is being sold in an emergency to Bank of America. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, the last two independent investment banks, are being attacked by speculators betting on their demise. In England, Northern Rock had already collapsed months earlier in the first British bank run in more than a century. Now, banks across Europe are teetering. Iceland faces national bankruptcy. Asian markets are sinking. It's a global crisis synchronized in real time. Paulson and Bernanke go to Congress with an unprecedented proposal. They need $700 billion to buy up the bank's toxic assets. Without this, the financial system will completely collapse. There will be a depression. ATMs will stop working. Credit cards will stop processing. The modern economy will cease. Congressmen are furious. Why should we bail out Wall Street after they caused this disaster? But Bernanke, usually academic and measured, is blunt. If we don't do it, there will be no economy on Monday. The terror in his voice is palpable. This isn't politics. It's system survival. TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, is approved after an initial rejection that caused the largest drop in the history of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. $700 billion of public money will go to bail out the institutions that caused the crisis. The irony is bitter, but the alternative is unthinkable. Unlike in 1929, this time the government intervened massively and swiftly. The Federal Reserve reduced interest rates to near zero. It implemented quantitative easing, buying bonds to inject money into the economy. The programs rivaled the New Deal in scale. Banks are recapitalized with public funds. Government guarantees are extended. The financial system is put on life support. It works. Total collapse is avoided. There are no massive bank runs. ATMs continue to operate. The payment system survives. But the cost is astronomical, not just in public money, but in credibility. Capitalism has revealed a fundamental hypocrisy. Socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. Banks that preach free markets are bailed out by the government. Workers who lose their jobs and homes receive crumbs. 2009 to 2012. The economy enters the worst recession since the Great Depression. 8 million jobs disappear. Unemployment reaches 10%. Millions of homes are foreclosed. Household wealth falls dramatically. The middle class is devastated. But it's not the Great Depression. Unemployment, though terrible at 10%, never reaches 25% of the 30s. There are no Hoovervilles. Unemployment insurance, food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid. The social safety net built after the Depression cushions the fall. The banking system survives. The FDIC protects deposits. There is no bank run. Savings are safe. The reforms of 1930 work exactly as designed. The lessons have been learned, at least partially. Yet the recovery is painfully slow. Wages stagnate. Inequality soars. Banks are bailed out, but millions of homeowners lose their homes. Public anger boils over. Movements like Occupy Wall Street emerge, protesting the bailed out 1% while the 99% suffer. Post-crisis investigations reveal a web of negligence, greed, and fraud. Banks sold mortgages they knew couldn't be repaid. Rating agencies gave AAA ratings to toxic waste because the issuers paid them. Regulators looked the other way, captured by the industry they were supposed to oversee. Angelo Mazzillo of Countrywide Financial aggressively sold subprime mortgages while secretly selling his own company stock. Dick Fuld of Lehman Brothers concealed the true state of his company's finances. Goldman Sachs traders bet against the very products they sold to clients. But almost no one goes to prison. Fines are paid with corporate money, not personal money. Executives keep their fortunes. Some even receive bailout bonuses, paid with taxpayer money. Justice seems reversed. Small-time swindlers go to prison. Big-time thieves and neckties receive compensation. The comparison with 1929 is instructive. After that crash, thousands of bankers were prosecuted. Charles Mitchell of National City was tried. Richard Whitney went to prison. After 2008, a single major banker was convicted. Impunity breeds a corrosive cynicism about the system. The Dodd-Frank Act of 2010 attempts to prevent another crisis. It strengthens banking supervision. It creates the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It attempts to restrict speculative trading by banks. It is the most significant financial reform since the 1930s, but it's full of compromises. The financial industry spends millions on lobbying, weakening the strongest provisions. The Volcker Rule, which would separate commercial and investment banking as it did in the 1930s, is watered down to near ineffectiveness. Banks that are too big to fail become even bigger after forced mergers during the crisis. And the fundamentals remain unchanged. Incentives remain distorted. Traders receive bonuses for short-term gains, but don't pay for long-term losses. Systemically important institutions know they will be bailed out. Moral hazard persists, perhaps stronger than before. Worse still, memory is short. By 2015, Wall Street is once again challenging regulations, arguing that they stifle innovation. Politicians, funded by financial industry donors, are beginning to roll back Dodd-Frank. History threatens to repeat itself. 2020. A new crisis strikes, this time biological, not financial. The COVID-19 pandemic paralyzes the global economy. The stock market drops 30% in weeks. For a moment, it seems like 2008 will repeat itself. But the response is swift and massive. The Federal Reserve intervenes with trillions in liquidity. The government sends direct checks to families. Loan programs protect small businesses. The lessons of 1929 and 2008 have been learned. Intervene early. Intervene massively. The market recovers within months. By the end of 2020, it reaches new records, even as the real economy continues to suffer. The disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street has never been more obvious. Financial assets rise while millions are unemployed. This rapid recovery creates another bubble. With interest rates at zero and free money flowing, investors seek returns in increasingly risky assets. Tech stocks reach absurd valuations. Cryptocurrencies explode. SPACs, an investment vehicle that avoids regulatory scrutiny, proliferate. NFTs sell for millions. It's 1929 all over again, or 2000. The frenzy is different in details, but identical in spirit. The belief that this time is different, that the old rules don't apply, that everyone can get rich risk-free. History doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. Episode 7, Lessons Not Learned. 2024. Almost a century after Black Thursday, Wall Street is back in euphoria mode. The S&P 500 index has reached historic records. Valuations, measured by any traditional metric, are at levels only seen in 1929 and 2000. The parallels are unsettling for those familiar with the story. Disruptive technology promises to transform everything. In the 1920s, it was radio and automobiles. In the 2000s, it was the internet. Today, it's artificial intelligence and quantum computing. The narrative is always the same. This technology is so revolutionary that traditional valuations don't apply. Mass speculation by retail investors. In the 1920s, it was boot cleaners buying stocks. In the 2000s, it was day traders. Today, it's Robinhood, and Wall Street bets users on Reddit, organizing on social media to manipulate stocks like GameStop and AMC. The democratization of speculation, celebrated as empowerment, is identical to that of 1929. Extreme leverage. Margin buying of the 20 has its modern equivalent in options, algorithmic trading, and complex derivative instruments that multiply profits and losses. Investors can control positions 10, 20, 50 times larger than their capital. When the market rises, they are geniuses. When it falls, they are dust. TikTok and YouTube financial influencers are the Charles Mitchells of this era. With millions of followers, they promise easy wealth. 10 stocks that will make you a millionaire by 2025. How I turned $1,000 into $1 million in 6 months. The secret method Wall Street doesn't want you to know. Every bull market creates its gurus. In the 1920s, it was Jesse Livermore. In the 1990s, it was Jim Cramer. Today, they're figures with usernames like Crypto King or Stonks Only. The difference is speed. A viral video can move markets in hours. Information or misinformation spreads instantly to millions. Cryptocurrencies add another layer of speculation. Bitcoin, Ethereum, thousands of altcoins with absurd names, and no real purpose beyond being staked. They are the tulip bulbs of the 21st century, assets whose only value is that someone else will pay more tomorrow. Fortunes are made and lost in days. NFTs were the height of absurdity, digital images of monkeys selling for millions, celebrities endorsing projects, everyone proclaiming it's the future of art, of ownership, of everything. Then the market crashes. NFTs lose 99% of their value, and buyers discover that owning a digital receipt for an image has no intrinsic value. March 2023. Silicon Valley Bank, the 16th largest bank in the United States, collapses in 48 hours. It is the second largest bank failure in American history after Washington Mutual. Signature Bank and First Republic follow. The cause? Terrible investments in long-term bonds when rates were low. When the Fed raises rates to combat inflation, those bonds lose value. Nervous depositors withdraw their money. The classic bank run of 1930 is repeated in the era of online banking, only faster. No physical lines, just clicks that transfer millions in seconds. The contagion threatens to spread. Regulators intervene, guaranteeing all deposits, even beyond the insured limit. It's another bailout, even if it's not officially called that. The message is clear. Large depositors are protected. Moral hazard is reinforced once again, but the fragility revealed is worrying. These bankruptcies did not occur during a crisis, but in a supposedly healthy economy. What will happen when the next recession hits? How many more banks are sitting on unrealized losses, waiting for the catalyst to trigger panic? Since 2008, interest rates have remained at historically low levels for most of the time. Free or almost free money. This policy was necessary to revive the economy after crisis, but it has become permanent, a drug from which the economy cannot escape. Cheap money inflates everything. Real estate prices have reached absurd levels. In cities like San Francisco, New York, and London, ordinary homes cost millions. An entire generation is excluded from homeownership, not because of lack of jobs, but because assets have been inflated by speculative capital seeking returns in a world of zero interest rates. Companies have become addicted to cheap credit. They buy their own shares with borrowed money to inflate prices and trigger executive bonuses based on stock performance. They don't invest in teams or workers, but in financial engineering. Value is extracted, not created. Zombie companies are proliferating. Companies that don't generate enough profit pay even the interest on their debt, but survive because they can refinance at perpetually low rates. When rates rise, as in 2022 and 2023, these companies begin to collapse. The cleanup that was supposed to happen in 2008 was merely postponed. The most striking difference between 1929 and today is not financial but social. Wealth inequality in the United States has reached levels not seen since the Roaring '20s. The richest 1% own a proportion of the national wealth comparable to a century ago. But there's a crucial difference. In 1929, many ordinary people participated in the stock market, albeit with dangerous leverage. Today, most stocks are in the hands of the richest 10%. When the market rises, the rich get richer. When it falls, the rich lose, but the poor never won. Post-2008 policies have amplified this inequality. Quantitative easing inflated asset prices. Those who own assets, the wealthy, benefited enormously. Those who relied on wages saw their income stagnate. The Federal Reserve, unintentionally, became the most powerful engine of inequality in the country. This inequality has political consequences. Populism on the left and right is growing. Trust in institutions is collapsing. Social cohesion is fracturing. The similarities with the 1930s are ominous. Economic desperation, creating conditions for political extremism. History doesn't repeat itself, but the patterns are familiar. There are always warning voices. Academic economists publishing papers on systemic vulnerabilities. Analysts pointing out unsustainable valuations. Historians reminding us that no bull market lasts forever. But as in 1929, they are ignored, ridiculed, marginalized. Michael Burry, who predicted the 2008 crash and was immortalized in The Big Short, has repeatedly warned of new bubbles. He is dismissed as a perpetual pessimist. Jeremy Grantham, a veteran investor with decades of experience, has called the current market the mother of all bubbles. Markets rise, and his warnings seem wrong until they are. The social pressure to participate is immense. When all your friends are getting rich off meme stocks or cryptocurrencies, sitting out seems stupid. FOMO, the fear of missing out, is the most powerful psychological force in the markets. It drives manias. It turns rational people into irrational speculators. And always the most dangerous phrase in finance. This time it's different. We have better technology, better regulation, better economic understanding. Central banks know what to do. It can't happen again. Except it can and probably will, because human nature doesn't change. Greed, fear, euphoria, panic. The cycle is eternal. 2024. Warning signs are flashing red for those watching. The bond yield curve has inverted, a historically reliable predictor of recessions. Inflation, after years of dormancy, has reawakened, forcing central banks to aggressively raise rates. The real estate market, especially commercial real estate, is under severe pressure. Offices are empty due to post-pandemic remote work. Shopping malls are obsolete due to e-commerce. The values of these assets are falling, but the loans against them remain on bank books. Losses are inevitable. They just haven't been recognized yet. Corporate debt is at record levels. Government debt is at record levels. Student debt, credit card debt, auto debt, all at record levels. The global economy is more indebted than ever before, and all that debt became more expensive when rates rose. China, the engine of global growth for 2 decades, is reeling. Its real estate sector, which accounts for a third of its economy, is in crisis. Evergrande, the largest real estate developer, has collapsed with $300 billion in debt. Contagion to Europe, Asia, and the United States is a matter of time. We don't know when the next crash will be. It could be tomorrow. It could be in 5 years. Markets can remain irrational longer than investors can remain solvent, as Keynes said. But we know it's coming. It always comes. It could be triggered by a geopolitical crisis, war, a pandemic, the collapse of a major economy. It could be purely financial, the bankruptcy of a systemically important bank, a sovereign default, a monetary policy error. Or it could be, as in 1929, simply the accumulated weight of unsustainable valuations collapsing under their own gravity. What's different today is the interconnectedness. Markets are globalized. A crisis anywhere can instantly spread everywhere. Algorithmic trading can amplify declines in microseconds. Social media can spread panic faster than any bank run of 1930. But there are also defenses that didn't exist in 1929. Deposit insurance, banking regulation, central banks willing to intervene, social safety nets. The question isn't whether there will be another crash, but how bad it will be and how well the institutions we've built to prevent or mitigate it will respond. Jesse Livermore once said, "Wall Street never changes because human nature never changes." Greed during the good times, panic during the bad. The story of 1929 is not a relic of the past. It's a manual for the future, waiting for the next generation to believe that this time is different. Episode 8. The Eternal Legacy. October 2029. Exactly a century after Black Thursday, Wall Street has organized commemorative events, academic conferences, and museum exhibitions. Economic historians reflect on how one day changed the world. But on the trading floors, business continues as usual. The New York Stock Exchange building still stands, although the actual trading takes place on electronic servers in New Jersey. The corner of Wall and Broad Street, where panicked crowds gathered in 1929, is now filled with tourists taking selfies with the Bronze Bull. J.P. Morgan, the bank that led the Black Thursday bailout attempt, remains one of the most powerful in the world. Lehman Brothers, which collapsed in 2008, has disappeared except in history books. Winners and losers change, but the game continues. The survivors of the 1929 crash are all dead. The last adult who lived through it would have died decades ago. Living memory has been extinguished. What remains are statistics, photographs, stories, and the lessons. If anyone is willing to listen, what did we really learn from 1929? The institutional reforms were significant and lasting. Deposit insurance ended bank runs. The separation between commercial and investment banking, although eroded, provided stability for decades. Securities regulation brought transparency and confidence. The most important lesson was about the role of government in the economy. The laissez-faire doctrine died in the 1930s. The idea that markets always correct themselves, that the government should not intervene, was discredited by the reality of the Great Depression. Capitalism needs regulation to survive its own excesses. Central banks have learned that they must act as lenders of last resort. The Federal Reserve of 1929, constrained by the gold standard and economic orthodoxy, failed to provide liquidity when needed. Modern Federal Reserves, especially after Ben Bernanke, don't make that mistake. They flood the system with money at the first sign of panic. Social safety nets, unthinkable before the Depression, are now essential. Unemployment insurance, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These programs prevent recessions from turning into depressions by maintaining consumption during difficult times. They are automatic stabilizers that work without the need for political action. But other lessons seem to be forgotten with each generation. The most fundamental, markets are not rational. They are driven by human psychology, by manias and panics. Market efficiency is an academic myth that collapses under the reality of recurring speculative bubbles. Every generation believes it has tamed the business cycle. In the 1920s, they believed unlimited speculation was sustainable because technology had changed everything. In the 1960s, they believed macroeconomic management had eliminated recessions. In the 2000s, they believed financial sophistication had dispersed risk. Each time they were wrong. Regulation always erodes during good times. Financial industries lobby. Politicians cave in. Rules weaken. And when the next crisis hits, everyone asks how it could have happened. The answer is always the same. We allowed it to happen by dismantling protections that prevented exactly this. Moral hazard is the lesson we never learn permanently. Every bailout, necessary to prevent systemic collapse, creates the incentive to take excessive risks in the next cycle. Banks know they will be bailed out. Speculators know the Fed will intervene. Why be cautious when the profits are yours, but the losses will be socialized? History remembers the great names, J.P. Morgan, Jesse Livermore, Franklin Roosevelt. But the true victims and heroes of 1929 are anonymous. The office worker who lost his life savings but continued to get up every morning looking for a job that didn't exist. The mother who fed her children before herself. The teacher who shared his lunch with hungry students. There are also the quiet heroes who built the recovery. The CCC workers who planted 3 billion trees and built 800 parks. The WPA engineers who constructed 650,000 miles of roads, 125,000 public buildings, 75,000 bridges. Their physical labor, not financial maneuvering, pulled America out of the Depression. The regulators who wrote the new rules after the crash are rarely remembered. Ferdinand Pecora, the prosecutor who investigated Wall Street and exposed the corruption that caused crash. His public hearings destroyed reputations, but saved the system by restoring trust through accountability. Joseph Kennedy, a former speculator turned first chairman of the SEC, who used his knowledge of Wall Street scams to prevent them. And there are the economists whose ideas were forged in the Depression. John Maynard Keynes, who argued that government should spend during recessions. John Kenneth Galbraith, who documented the psychology of speculative bubbles. Hyman Minsky, who theorized that stability breeds instability because it leads to overconfidence. His ideas, validated by the crash, guide policy to this day. Economic statistics capture some of the devastation of the Great Depression. 25% unemployment, a 50% drop in GDP, thousands of bankruptcies. But they don't capture the psychological trauma of a generation. Children who grew up during the Depression carried invisible scars all their lives. Chronic anxiety about money, inability to enjoy prosperity because they always anticipated the next crash, compulsive hoarding because they remember going hungry, distrust of banks, markets, the entire system, the broken marriages, the families torn apart when desperate parents abandoned their families because they couldn't provide, the suicides that were never recorded as related to depression but were directly caused by financial ruin, the alcoholism, the domestic violence, the devastated mental health, and the darkest cost, World War II. The connection isn't direct, but it's undeniable. The Depression created political conditions that allowed the rise of fascism. Hitler, Mussolini, the Japanese militarists all took advantage of economic desperation. 50 million war dead owe a partial debt to the Wall Street crash. Looking ahead to 2029, new vulnerabilities are emerging that didn't even exist in 1929. Climate change threatens to destabilize entire economies. Droughts, floods, and mass migrations will have financial impacts that will dwarf the crashes of the past. Automation and artificial intelligence could create massive job dislocation. In 1929, displaced workers eventually found new jobs in new industries. But what happens when AI can do most of the cognitive work? How does capitalism function when human labor is no longer necessary? Cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance create new systemic risks beyond regulatory reach. A collapse in these markets could spill over into traditional finance in unpredictable ways. There is no lender of last resort for blockchain. There is no FDIC for crypto exchanges. Extreme political polarization means that the coordinated response that saved the system in 2008 may be impossible in the next crisis. If one party controls Congress and another the presidency, and they hate each other more than they fear economic collapse, who will save the system? Political dysfunction could be more dangerous than financial instability. The crash of 1929 has become American mythology. It is the cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed. It is a founding narrative of the New Deal and the modern welfare state. It is a supreme example of how unregulated free markets can self-destruct, but mythologies can distort as much as they illuminate. The simplified narrative blames Wall Street speculation and absolves the public who willingly participated. It idealizes a New Deal while ignoring its limitations and failures. It suggests we fix it after age 30, when in reality each generation must fight the same battles again. Cultural memory is fragile. 100 years after crash, few Americans can name it properly. It was Black Thursday on October 24th, although Black Tuesday on October 29th was worse. Most can't explain what caused it beyond vague generalities about speculation. The story is being forgotten even as we commemorate its anniversary. And that's dangerous. George Santayana wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But even remembering doesn't guarantee that we won't repeat it. We know how bubbles begin. We know how they end. And yet, each generation builds a new one, convinced that this time is different. In an office overlooking Wall Street in 2029, a young trader watches multiple screens flashing with prices and charts. She is 25 years old. She was born long after 2008. The Great Depression is history as distant as the Civil War. For her, it's only theory, not live reality. His portfolio is growing. He's made money every year of his short career. His bonuses are generous. He sees his superiors making millions. The market is at record highs. The economy is growing. The headlines are positive. Why not leverage more? Why not take more risk? Everyone else is doing it. You haven't read about 1929. Not deeply. You know there was a crash, which was bad, which led to regulations. But that was 100 years ago. The world has changed. Technology has advanced. Economic understanding is superior. We have firewalls, regulation, sophisticated central banks. It can't happen again. This is exactly the attitude that preceded 1929 and 2000 and every financial crisis in history. The overconfidence born of recent positive experience. The belief that we are smarter, more careful, more sophisticated than previous generations. The forgetting that human fundamentals don't change. Greed, fear, euphoria, panic. Somewhere in the city, perhaps in that same office, someone else is looking at the same numbers and seeing something different. They're seeing unsustainable valuations. They're seeing dangerous leverage. They're seeing all the signs that preceded 1929 and 2008. They're quietly selling, moving money to safety, preparing for the collapse they know is coming. The true legacy of 1929 isn't in the statistics or the political reforms. It's in the fundamental lesson about the nature of capitalism, that is a tremendously productive but inherently unstable system. It generates unprecedented growth and prosperity, but also contains the seeds of its own destruction. Unrestricted free markets tend toward excess. Excess creates bubbles. Bubbles inevitably burst. The burst causes massive suffering unless institutions intervene. But institutions only exist because previous crises created them, and they erode during good times when they seem unnecessary. This is a cycle we've repeated for centuries, and will likely repeat for centuries more. Not because we're stupid or evil, but because we're human, because memories are short, because each generation must learn its own lessons, because greed and fear are powerful emotions that cloud rational judgment. The question isn't whether there will be another crash like 1929. The question is what will trigger it, and whether the institutions we built to prevent or mitigate it will still be strong enough to function. The answer to that question will determine whether the next crisis is a painful correction or a civilizational catastrophe. The sun sets over Wall Street, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers. Office lights begin to come on. Traders prepare for another night monitoring global markets that never sleep. Money flows, invisible but omnipresent, seeking returns, taking risks, betting on the future. Somewhere in the city, in a forgotten archive, are the original newspapers from October 24th and 29th, 1929. The headlines scream panic in antique type. The photographs show faces of despair and shock. They are documents from another time, but they are also mirrors of the future. Because history doesn't repeat itself exactly. Details change. Technology evolves. Names are different, but the fundamental patterns persist. Boom and bust. Euphoria and panic. Greed and fear. These are human constants, unchanged through the centuries. And so, 100 years after Black Thursday, Wall Street continues its eternal dance, building wealth and destroying it, creating the future and threatening to annihilate it, promising prosperity for all while concentrating power in the few. It's the best system we've ever invented and the most dangerous we've ever tolerated. The question that 1929 leaves behind is not technical or financial. It is moral and existential. Can we build an economy that maintains the benefits of capitalism, innovation, growth, and freedom, while mitigating its dangers, instability, inequality, and recurring crisis? Or we are doomed to dance this waltz forever, pivoting between euphoria and catastrophe, each generation believing it has found the secret to eternal prosperity, only to learn, too late, that the cycle never ends. The lights of Wall Street shine brightly against the gathering darkness. Trading continues. Money flows. The world turns. And somewhere unseen but inevitable, the next crisis waits. We don't know when it will come. We don't know what form it will take. But it will come, because that's how it's always been. And that's how it always will be, until we learn the lessons history has tried to teach us for a century, if we ever learn them. The legacy of 1929 is not a warning we hear once and never forget. It is a warning we must constantly remind ourselves of generation after generation, because forgetting is as human as panic itself. And when the next crash comes, when markets collapse and panic reigns, when experts ask, how could this have happened? The answer will be waiting in the pages of history that no one read, in the lessons of 1929 that we deliberately forgot, because remember would have meant giving up the illusion that this time, finally, it is different. It isn't. It never is.